So this should be a really short video then, right? Because you're talking about factions, which means you're going to just say, Morrowind, do it like Morrowind. Morrowind did it right, do it like Morrowind. That's it. Thank you very much. You're not going to do something stupid like saying, Oblivion did something better, right? Right? No one's going to think that, right? Please tell me you're not going to say Oblivion did something... Oh, God. Are you going to say Skyrim did something better?
Now you might be thinking to yourself, why factions? Why are you covering factions before other things like the world or the main quest? Surely those are much more important. And I would respond by saying, yes, those things are very important, but they're also fairly self-evident and a little simpler. Whereas I believe factions are one of the unsung pillars of the Elder Scrolls series. In fact, I would go so far as to say the factions are the reason I play the Elder Scrolls games over and over and over. They're one of the big reasons I can keep replaying the game each and every time. In fact, I can tell you now that most of my playthroughs of Elder Scrolls games have not actually completed the main quest, and I suspect there's a lot of people who are like me. You've probably done, 3 or 4 playthroughs where you did finish the main quest of Skyrim, but I wonder how many of you are like me, have got like 10, 15 playthroughs where you didn't even touch the main quest. Maybe you started it to get the shouts, but then you went off and just did the Companions or the Thieves Guild, or maybe 2 or 3 guilds, and then at a certain point started a new character, a new playthrough. And I think a big part of that is the fact that there are these factions, these groups that you can join. They're not just people who give you side quests, they're people that you join, people that you become a part of, and you grow with them, you climb the ranks, and eventually probably become their leader. These factions become the main reason for you to play. And for this reason, I think they have to get the factions right in the next Elder Scrolls game. So that's what we're covering in this video. Quantity. Yes, I want to talk about how many factions the next Elder Scrolls game should have. And the short answer is as many as possible. I want as many factions as you can get in the game. However, I do understand that quality and quantity often conflict. So I would say I don't want them to put lots of factions in if it means the quality suffers. I would rather have 5 or 6 great factions than 60 totally crap factions. I also only want a faction to exist if it actually makes sense. I don't want some faction just jammed into the game for the sake of it. It should be something that does in fact make sense in the context of the game. Now originally this was going to be one of those areas where Morrowind wins conclusively. It had loads of joinable factions and it was the clear winner. However, that was based upon my memory of the game and I didn't want to rely on that, so I checked back with the wiki for joinable factions for Oblivion, Skyrim and Morrowind, and was surprised to find out that Morrowind only has 16 joinable factions if you include all 3 vampire clans, and Oblivion and Skyrim both have 15. However, I would point out that there are a few factions in the Oblivion listings, for example, that really don't belong. Order of the Dragon and the Arena faction, for example. The Arena faction is not listed in the Morrowind page, but it is listed in Oblivion. And in Skyrim you have things like the Coven of Namira listed, the Bard's College, which is a faction but I always feel was more of a mini faction. So Morrowind did not have as many factions as I remember, but I still feel it wins because I still feel the factions were all fully fleshed out factions, whereas some of the factions listed in the later 2 games were, you know, pushing that label a little. I even wondered if it was actually Daggerfall I was remembering as having lots and lots of factions, but I checked the wiki there and it had even less. So it could just be a case of, with each game, I expect more factions and so feel a little disappointed. However, I would still say for sheer number of factions, fully fledged joinable factions, I think Morrowind wins this one, and what I want to see for the next game is as many as possible. Progression. This is one Morrowind wins hands down, no contest. It stomps Oblivion and it completely teabags Skyrim's corpse in this particular battle. I mean, in Morrowind, to progress through the ranks of a guild, you will need to do quite a lot of questing, you will need to earn their trust, and you will need to show some competence in key skills. So, for example, if you're a wizard, you will need to show some competence in certain spellcasting schools. Contrast that to Skyrim, where you can pretty much stumble into the faction's headquarters, fall on the floor in a drunken stupor, vomit over the current guild master, and then start inappropriately touching yourself while giggling on the floor, and everyone in the room looks at you as if to say, "Ooh, you're amazing, maybe you should become our leader." In Morrowind, progression is something you earn. In Skyrim, it is something you just get given because you're the player character. Now, Oblivion was somewhere in between those two games, but it was actually closer to Morrowind when it came to the earning of people's trust. You had to join the guild and then do several quests, probably with several different quest givers, and slowly gain their trust and climb the ranks. Skyrim didn't even have ranks, and honestly, you got the quests, the main quests, so quickly it was kinda ridiculous. You know, you would join the Thieves Guild and you'd be on the fast track to the most important jobs more or less instantly. You could join the Companions and you'd be in the inner circle in no time whatsoever. It was just a bit ridiculous how everyone just keeps putting all of the major tasks onto your shoulders as if they just know you can do it even though they only met you a day and a half ago. And don't get me started on the fact that you can actually become the Archmage of the College of Winterhold, and I believe of the Mages Guild in Oblivion, without actually being able to cast spells. You know, I think in Skyrim you need to cast 2 spells in the entire quest line. Everything else can be done with either, you know, a dagger, a sword, or by using scrolls and staves in the few instances where it will require something like fire elemental or a cold element. There are only 2 places where you actually have to cast a spell. In fact, no, there's 1, because you can talk your way into the college. So there's only 1 place where you absolutely have to cast a spell, and honestly, I think that's just, it's a little ridiculous. Skill requirements for progression through the ranks in a guild make sense, or at least they do for most guilds. It's something I did like in Morrowind and I want in the next Elder Scrolls game. I will accept that for some guilds it might not make as much sense. For example, the Thieves Guild. You could argue they probably don't care what skill you use to acquire the goods. If you've been given a task to steal something, they don't care if you're a master thief who can lockpick and sneak brilliantly, or if you're actually a spellcaster who uses invisibility or the old open locks spells to get places and steal what is needed to steal. It might be a little weird for you to be a mage who does nothing but steal, and the guild might look at you as a little bit odd, but in actual fact, if you're an effective thief, you could argue, yeah, why not climb through the ranks? You probably won't get asked to be a teacher though, you know, you're not going to be showing people the ropes, although, again, you could argue, why not? I mean, would the Thieves Guild be interested in a bit of illusion magic? I will accept there are some cases where skills may not be an absolute requirement. The Dark Brotherhood. The Dark Brotherhood don't care if you kill someone through stealth, with a dagger in the back, or you blast them to pieces with a fireball. You know, you think of the Dark Brotherhood questline. There's a variety of different approaches to murdering your prey, and they seem to enjoy all of them, so I can see why it might not make sense there. But in a Mage's Guild, you really need to have some competence in at least one spell school to really climb the ranks in the wizarding world. And the same is true of the Fighters Guild actually. You might be someone who gets the job done, but you're going to be sparring with them, training with them, and they're not going to want to have someone who's like a high ranking fighter if they actually suspect he can't hold his own in a fight, that he does the jobs by using stealth or even magic. That they may appreciate you, they may like you, but they're not going to elevate you in status because they will respect martial skills and they're probably going to demand it. So, for the next Elder Scrolls game, bring back the ranks in these factions. Have rank titles. Most people enjoyed it. Some factions it may not make sense. So if you have the occasional faction where there's no formal title, I get it. But for Fighters Guild, for Mages Guild, Thieves Guild, I don't see why you don't have ranks. You could just give them names. They don't have to even be called ranks. You know, you could just become like a sub-boss in the Thieves Guild. You're given a bit more responsibility. Bring back those ranks. Bring back skill requirements where it makes sense. And please have a clear and lengthy sense of progression through the guild. Have lots of side quests. Force the player to build up trust, to earn the progression rather than just sort of be given it on a silver platter just for turning up. I don't want a bloody participation trophy, okay? Character. This is the one that's going to make heads explode because I think Skyrim wins this one. I think it wins it pretty easily as well. I found the factions in Morrowind to be somewhat two-dimensional and a little bland, whereas I found the factions in Skyrim to be truly interesting and have true character of their own. Now that is going to be a very unpopular opinion, I suspect. However, allow me to explain by looking at Oblivion. Bear with me, I know that sounds a little weird since I was talking about Morrowind and Skyrim, but I think Oblivion was the transition point for factions. Think about most of the factions in Oblivion, the Mages Guild, the Fighters Guild, the Thieves Guild. They were very similar to the factions in Morrowind. The character for those factions was very similar. They were fairly standard meeting places for people who shared a profession. The Fighters Guild, you know, you wander into the Fighters Guild and it was filled with people who were wearing armour and carrying swords or maces. They were training and they were getting ready to do fighter type jobs, and then you'd go right next door into the Mages Guild that looked suspiciously similar, and it was filled to the brim with people in robes who were training spells and getting ready to do spell requiring jobs. Even though they had different professions, they felt very similar. They were professional guilds. In some ways, you could have had the Fighters Guild, the Mages Guild, the Plumbers Guild and the Bakers Guild right next to each other, and they would have all felt relatively the same. They were just, you know, a group of people who shared a work interest. Not even a work interest, they just did the same job, so they came together to organise and probably control prices. It was pretty commercial and almost like just a pure business transaction. But there was one faction that was a little different, and that faction was the Dark Brotherhood. Now, the Dark Brotherhood in Oblivion gets talked about quite a lot, and it gets a lot of praise because of the writing, the quest, the dialogue, the characters. But people tend not to focus on how radically different it was to all of the other guilds in character. And by that I mean it actually had a character. You think about all of the other guilds. You could be a kind and wonderful wizard. You could be an evil, power-mad wizard and join the Mages Guild. You could be a good, honourable fighter or an evil, vicious, bandit-type fighter and join the Fighters Guild. You could even be a good thief. In fact, the game almost seemed to want to promote that at times in things like Morrowind, even Oblivion. You know, they're sort of a Robin Hood, rob from the rich, give to the poor kind of thing. You join the Dark Brotherhood. You're not a good anything, sunshine. You know you've got issues when you're in the Dark Brotherhood, right? You're not a good person when you're in the Dark Brotherhood. You know, I know some people are going to try and stretch the role playing to the absolute limits and come up with good reasons why joining the Dark Brotherhood was for the greater good. But best case scenario, you're a vicious, cold-hearted killer that kills for money. Worst case scenario, you're a psychopath who enjoys setting fire to people. The Dark Brotherhood was dark. It was evil. No, it did not cater to your character. It had its own character, and you had to decide, did you want to join them? And I loved that. It did mean on certain playthroughs you wouldn't be able to join them. This did mean that, you know, if you wanted to play a good character and you still wanted to know what you were missing in the Dark Brotherhood, you might have to start an evil character too. But I actually think that's one of the strengths of that particular faction. It encourages multiple playthroughs with very different mentalities, so that you will go in thinking, well, this time I'm going to be an evil character, and this time I'm going to take all the evil dialogue. I'm going to be nasty, I'm going to be horrible, I'm going to see what happens. I'm not going to be a goody two-shoes or a Robin Hood type character. And I thought that was brilliant. In comparison, the other factions just felt bland. They were way too generic. They really did not demand much from the player beyond a willingness to actually join them. You know, the only reason you would not join the Mages Guild is if you had no interest in magic. In fact, you might not have any interest in magic, but you might still join them just to get a few quests or access to some of the traders there. You know, you might just join for the sake of joining, whereas you did not do that with the Dark Brotherhood. And what I liked about Skyrim was that they went in that direction with their factions. The Warriors Guild was replaced with the Companions, who have a very strong warrior mythos, the Viking mentality, honour, pride in their martial prowess, and this sort of feeling of brotherhood, a feeling of belonging to the Companions, to a group who were famed for being brave and tough. And, you know, there was something about them that really called to me to be a warrior. Not to just join them for a couple of quests, but to be a warrior. And the Thieves Guild was what did it for me. You know, there was none of this, I'm going to join and be Robin Hood. No, the first quest you get with the Thieves Guild is to set up an innocent man, to plant something on him so that he ends up spending time in jail. The next quest you get is to wander around strong-arming merchants. You're basically running a protection racket by, you know, going round and being a thug. There's no way around it. You join the Thieves Guild in Skyrim and you're joining a criminal organisation who are thugs and scumbags. You can try to dress it up in your own mind. You can say, well, once I got through that, I was doing nice things by stealing from the rich and give to the poor. Yeah, but you also threatened to smash someone's holy symbol, and you started breaking jugs in another guy's shop just to get him to pay the protection money. Yes, you did. You're not a nice person. Stop pretending to yourself. And for me, this is why Skyrim wins. It's not a massive difference. It is kind of subtle in some ways, but each of the factions just feels very different to the other factions. They feel different in a way that the factions in Morrowind just didn't. For me, I often say that in Morrowind the factions feel like fast food stores. You know, you've got a branch in every single city, and then you go out and you actually find the the McDonald's and the Burger King and the Kentucky Fried Chicken. They're all right next to each other in the same street, all selling competing food. The only difference with the guilds is there's a very good chance you'll enter the city and go into all three of those to pick up the quests in all three of them. That's how it felt to me. The Dark Brotherhood in Oblivion and all of the factions in Skyrim felt, well, they felt more like restaurants. It's that. You look at Oblivion, most of the guilds feel like fast food franchises, one in every city. But the Dark Brotherhood, it was a restaurant. It was a restaurant that served murder, but it was still a restaurant. And finally, conflict. Yes, I would like to see some conflict between the factions. And by that I mean the sort of conflict we got between the Stormcloaks and the Legion in Skyrim. Now, I don't necessarily mean it has to be a civil war and one side wins, but I would like to see certain factions that you can join basically prevent you from joining another faction. I mean, if you join a Knights Guild, a guild that's all about honour and upholding the law, you really should not be joining the Thieves Guild as well. So it would be nice to see that kind of guild or that kind of faction where it forces you to make a choice and then actually perhaps even puts you in conflict with another guild. So perhaps if you're a Thieves Guild, you end up actually robbing the Knights Guild, or you find the Knights send people after you. Kind of like the Vigilants versus vampires or werewolves. You know, if you join the Companions, suddenly the Vigilants are after you, but you can't join the Vigilants in Skyrim. It would have been nice if you could. If you could join the Vigilants, but then, you know, that's it. You couldn't climb the ranks in the Companions. You could perhaps have become a Companion, and then once you realised you were becoming a werewolf, if you chose to do that, it kicked you out of the Vigilance. Those sort of things I quite like. The idea that not all guilds are compatible with each other. I suppose this somewhat goes hand in hand with the character idea, but I do enjoy the idea that my choices have some kind of consequence and will prevent me from, you know, doing certain things with certain other factions. Again, this is probably going to be less popular for people who like to do one single playthrough and do absolutely every single thing, but I think it plays to the strength of the Elder Scrolls games, and that is replayability. It gives you yet another reason to play again with a totally different character and see things from a different side. So yeah, give me some conflict. And that is all we have time for in this video. I will be back with another video, although I have not decided what the topic will be, so you're going to have to wait and see. I would love it if you could join me for that video, although I'm sure some of you are already looking forward to screaming at me because I didn't side with your game of choice, probably Morrowind, or even Daggerfall. There's some people who are going to give me grief for not including Daggerfall. I played Daggerfall 23 years ago. I can barely remember it. It might be brilliant. I remember enjoying it thoroughly, actually. But I'm going off what I remember because I don't really have a lot of other choices, do I? I'm trying to come up with my personal wish list for the Elder Scrolls 6, and I have to do that by my own personal memories. So, what my memories dredge up next time, we will just have to see. I hope you can join me for that video. I look forward to seeing you there, and until then, remember as always, have fun. See, I've just noticed that the ultimate Elder Scrolls game is Choose Game. And now I have this horrible urge to release this video on Tuesday because it's the ultimate Elder Scrolls day. That makes absolutely no sense, and yet